Surprise! It's Tuesday and not Wednesday. But you know what? Your eyes and ears do not deceive you. This is the Combat Press Midweek Report. Today, September 9th, 2014. It is a Tuesday. Programming note right off the bat. We're switching the date of this show till Tuesday, or 2 Tuesdays, in order to not conflict with airings of the upcoming season of The Ultimate Fighter. Perhaps we'll go back to Wednesdays after that's over, perhaps not. We're going to see how it goes, because we fly by the seat of our pants here at combatpress.com. Speaking of combatpress.com, that is who this show is obviously brought to you by. I'd like to thank Rob Tatum and Brian Henderson, sort of the runners of the site. They keep it all going together, and they do a fantastic job. So thank you to them for allowing this show to maintain its course on combatpress.com. Follow Combat Press on Twitter at Combat Press. My name is Eric Reinert. I am your host for the evening, and I am joined for the third consecutive time by all 6 foot 5 inches of encyclopedic MMA knowledge, Riley Cobra Contact. Riley, how are you this evening?
I'm doing great. I'm happy that you added an inch to my actual height, because now I sound taller than I already am.
I thought last week you said 6'5". You know what we're going to say?
6'4".
Build at 6'5". Build at
yeah,
6'5".
That's what they did in high school sports to make me look taller. Yeah.
From Chicago, Illinois, right? Build at 6'5". Riley Cobra Contact. Tonight we've got a lot to talk about, Riley. I want to discuss all of the happenings from this weekend in the world of MMA. This past weekend, and I guess the upcoming weekend as well. We had a fight night from Connecticut, featuring a pretty impressive middleweight performance and some other impressive performances that we will discuss. I also want to harken back to Saturday night, talk about Invicta 8, that of course aired on UFC Fight Pass from Kansas City. We'll preview this weekend's UFC Fight Night event, also on Fight Pass, coming to us from Brasilia, Brazil. That will be headlined by a heavyweight battle between Antonio Bigfoot Silva and Andre Arlovski, so we'll talk about a couple of fights on that card. We'll also preview the upcoming season of The Ultimate Fighter 20. A champion will be crowned. That's what they tell us, apparently, Riley. And that's, I guess, what's going to happen in the newly created UFC Women's Strawweight division. So that premieres this coming Wednesday, tomorrow, in fact, about 24 hours from now. So be sure to tune into that. We will give you guys a quick preview, some early thoughts on that season. And finally, we will talk about probably the most bizarre incident in the world of MMA, not just in the last weekend, but probably in the last several months to a year. Of course, I'm talking about the confrontation between Stephan Bonnar and Tito Ortiz at Bellator 123, also in Connecticut. Kind of a low light of the weekend, if you ask me, but we will talk a little bit more about that later in the show. Of course, check out all of the great content on combatpress.com. One of the best places on the internet for MMA news. We've got a lot of interviews, a lot of great interviews for this coming card. I saw one conducted with Andre Arlovski. I saw one with Efrain Escudero. So go to combatpress.com, check out those interviews in advance of this weekend's Fight Night card, along with all the rest of the great content. Riley's women's MMA rankings. Check those out on combatpress.com. Let's get into the bulk of the program here, Riley. This past weekend was a very busy one in the world of MMA. We talked about 2 of the shows this past on the last episode of the midweek report, and tonight I feel like we can safely recap at least elements of all 3 of them. Of course, I'm talking about UFC Fight Night, Invicta 8, and Bellator MMA 123. UFC Fight Night was probably the signature event of the weekend, obviously being, I would say, generally speaking, what could be a pay-per-view undercard, certainly, as the main card of the UFC Fight Night event from Ledyard, Connecticut, of course, headlined by Jacare Souza, defeating Gerard Mousasi. So my first question for you, Riley, is where does this put Jacare Souza with respect to the middleweight title? The UFC has updated its rankings. There is now only one man, Anderson Silva, standing between Jacare Souza and champion Chris Weidman in the rankings. So give us your thoughts.
Well, in my honest opinion, I think he is the top contender after Vitor Belfort. He's beaten everybody that's been put in front of him with ease, and they're all top guys, save for Chris Camozzi, who was a last-minute replacement, but still he finished him quickly. But I think Dana's made it pretty clear that he needs one more fight, and that would make sense considering Weidman's going to be fighting Vitor in December, I believe it is.
We hope.
So I believe that he would have to take one more fight, but in my opinion, I think he should just sit out. But if Weidman were to take an extended amount of time off, then I think that he would have one more fight, and in my opinion, that would be against the winner of Luke Rockhold, Michael Bisping.
Well, that's an interesting pick. I've got interesting potential fight for Jacare Souza in mind as well. I would think that he probably does, regardless of what Dana White has said, I think he deserves the next shot at the middleweight belt, particularly if Weidman is successful against Vitor Belfort. If he faces Vitor Belfort in December, I think Jacare should stay in fighting shape, if you know what I mean, because Belfort has not had the most reliable track record of late when it comes to appearing on cards for which he is scheduled. So I think Jacare would be an easy replacement should Belfort, for whatever reason, abdicate his role in the middleweight title picture for the time being. So it would be smart of Jacare to stay in fighting shape. I think like I said, if Weidman is able to beat Belfort, I think Jacare is probably the best guy to face him next. If Belfort is successful, I think you have a rematch on your hands, in which case a guy I would like to see Jacare fight, and I'm not sure if this fight's even going to be possible just from the logistics of it all, but Lyoto Machida is still sitting out there in the middleweight division, and I think he's obviously a legend of the sport, and perhaps relegated to gatekeeper status because of his loss to Chris Weidman. But I think a fight between him and Jacare, while perhaps not the most potential for a blockbuster ending, would be a fight between two reasonably talented individuals. Moving on then to the heavyweight, one of the heavyweight fights on the card. Ben Rothwell, I think, shocked a lot of people, myself included, when he knocked out Anderson Silva, when he knocked out Alistair Overeem during their fight. I thought this was a very interesting contest because Rothwell, he absorbed a handful of pretty nasty-looking kicks to his body from Overeem, and some looked like they stung a little bit, but he still was resilient enough to hang in there and take out, a guy who was probably prior to Friday night considered one of the best heavyweights in the sport. Riley, my question for you is the following. Does the result from Friday night say more about Ben Rothwell's ability, upside, if you will, in the cage, potential for the future, or does it say more about the perhaps late stage of Alistair Overeem's career such that he may need to consider another line of work sooner rather than later?
It says more about Overeem. I think in last week's discussion, I remember you took Rothwell because he was your fellow Wisconsin guy, and I said the only way that Rothwell is going to win is if he knocks him out because Overeem doesn't have a very good chin. And what happened? That's what happened. Overeem has been knocked out a few times in his last few fights. He really hasn't shown off a great beard in that time. And remember, we also discussed that once he got off the juice, he just hasn't looked like the same fighter. So I really think that Overeem is, he's almost a tax write-off at this point because he's got such a large contract and he just really hasn't done anything since coming to the UFC other than, fail a couple drug tests and lose some fights. So I think it doesn't say as much about Rothwell as it should because we should be impressed with the win, but it says more about Overeem that he's on the decline big time.
Do you think Overeem could find a home in the light heavyweight division?
No, he's too big. I don't think he can cut down. I think he weighed in at like 250-some pounds.
248, I thought it was.
248. I still don't think he can cut down. A lot of that's muscle. So I just don't think at this point he can go to 205. And as you can remember, in his Pride days, he was a lot smaller. But
right.
He's just he's just way bigger than he used to be. I don't think he can do it anymore.
Of all of the people who were victorious on Friday night, who for you was most impressive, perhaps aside from Jacare Souza?
I would probably go with Matt Mitrione. A lot of people were picking Derek Lewis to win that fight based on power. I wouldn't say the minority, but I think most people thought Lewis was going to win. But I was in the minority that thought that Mitrione was going to pull this off. And I thought he'd pull it off fairly simply just based on he has an athleticism edge, a quickness edge, and I think his boxing is sharper. And you saw that he finished Lewis in under a minute in what was just devastating fashion. He absolutely manhandled Lewis with his hands, and that was just very impressive the way he did that.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you 100%. I am one of the people who picked Lewis to defeat Mitrione, and less than a minute into the fight when Mitrione really got the best of Lewis, I kind of put my head in my hands and thought to myself, yeah, Riley was exactly right, because Mitrione did all of the things that you said he was going to do en route to victory. Where can Mitrione go from here? I mean, Derek Lewis, not the most difficult competition, certainly dangerous, but maybe not the most difficult. You know, we've seen Mitrione have some success against guys perhaps of Derek Lewis's caliber, but then when he kind of tries to step it up into, you know, the top 15, top 10 of the heavyweight division, he has some problems. Do you think, A, that he can find his way consistently into the upper echelon, or at least the middle echelon, of the UFC's heavyweight division? And if not, B, do you think that his UFC career has a lot of time left?
Well, I think it has as much time as he wants it to have. I mean, remember, he's only lost 3 fights, and he came into the UFC never having a professional fight in his career. So I think up until this point, he's done a very, very good job. With Mitrione, I think he's a career mid-carder, though. I mean, he just started too late. Most of the guys that are elite, he's never going to beat, but the guys under him, he's going to beat. So he'll always be stuck between that top 10 and top 20 status. And as you see, the heavyweight division, it ain't a youthful division. Most of the guys in there are old. Yeah. So there's a youth problem in the heavyweight division. And Mitrione, in terms of number age, isn't exactly a rookie anymore, but he also doesn't have as many miles as a guy like a Nogueira or a Frank Mir. So he'll be around longer than they will. So I think that he has a chance to stick around for as long as he wants, but he's just going to have trouble breaking through to the next level just because he doesn't have the background of experience that most of the other guys have.
Do you think, last Mitrione-related question, I'm just thinking of these off the top of my head here, do you think he could be lured away by a Bellator, a 1FC, somebody like that, who's looking for at least a recognizable name and perhaps could give him a higher paycheck than he would earn as a mid-carder in the UFC?
I doubt it. I think first off, he's a UFC guy. He appreciates the fact that they broke him into the business basically as a professional, and they took a chance on him. But I don't think that Bellator or 1FC would cough up the money for a guy like him, especially. I mean, Mitrione is probably making a decent show win for a guy in his position, and I don't think Bellator or 1FC would pay up that kind of money, to be honest with you. I mean, they might go after, like 1FC went after James McSweeney, but McSweeney didn't have a home. McSweeney is a guy that was jumping around from organization to organization. So I just don't think that Mitrione would leave based on that accord.
All right. Overall, pretty good card, I thought, for a Friday night. It was interesting. One of the things that I noticed, and I made sure to kind of take notice of this, was the Bellator arena seemed to be much larger than the venue for the UFC, which is probably the first time that that's ever happened. I think the UFC's perhaps is a little more densely packed, but it seemed like that Bellator arena, or the arena that it was in, was at least moderately populated. We'll get to a little bit more Bellator-related news in the latter portion of the show. But overall, I thought the UFC's offering on Friday night was certainly a solid one. Saturday night, the ladies of MMA had the spotlight shined directly on them as Invicta presented its eighth big card coming to us from Kansas City, headlined by a atomweight title match between the karate hottie Michelle Waterson and I forgot to write down her first, Yasuko Tamada. I have her last name written down, but I guess that's only 50% of the way.
Yeah.
I've got several questions for you here, Riley, but before we get to that, why don't you give me your overall impressions of the card as a whole? I heard some really great things about it overall from most fans of MMA who tuned in.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a great card. Save for maybe 1 or 2 fights that weren't that exciting, the rest of the offerings were very good. It was a combination of good fights, finishes, and those are the 2 types of things that fans want in an MMA card. Mm-hmm. You don't always get those, especially you'll have a UFC card that you don't either have finishes or good fights. This card had both of them. Obviously, the big disappointer was the main event going out in the middle of the fight between Waterson and Tamada.
Right.
And that's Invicta's curse. They can never finish a card without having stream problems. But overall, even with that misunderstanding, I thought it was a very, very solid card from the top to the bottom.
Of course, it was headlined by Michelle Waterson versus Yasuko Tamada. My question for you about Michelle Waterson is, she's obviously a person who is going to gain a fair amount of popularity as not only the atomweight champion in Invicta, but just as, one of the more standout type of women's MMA fighters. Do you think the UFC could try to lure her away to fight at 115?
They definitely could if they throw money at her. Like I said, I had people telling me that the UFC was going to look very closely at the numbers and who tuned in to watch this, and a big part of that was going to be because they wanted to see if Waterson was a draw or not. Basically, because she's an attractive woman that can fight. Obviously sex sells and all that spiel, but she's definitely one of the best fighters pound for pound in women's MMA, and if they want her, they can have her, I'm sure. But I think that if they did that, I think it would only be fair if they did a two-way deal where she could fight in Invicta as well at 105, because she's easily the best 105er in the world, and there's still some fights for her to have between Sohee Ham and Ayaka Hamasaki. There's still people that she can fight at 105.
Besides Waterson, obviously emerging victorious and retaining her 105-pound title, who stood out the most to you at Invicta 8 as a person to watch for the future?
There were actually three ladies I'd like to talk about. The first two I'm going to say are the two Mexican fighters that were on the card, Irene Aldana and Alexa Grasso. The UFC is going into Mexico with that pay-per-view, UFC 180, and they had even mentioned that they were going to have a couple of women's fights on the card, or at least one women's fight on the card. And I believe, in my opinion, that the two best Mexican fighters that are females were fighting on that Invicta card, and both won. Especially Irene Aldana. She destroyed Peggy Morgan, who, if you remember, was on The Ultimate Fighter and fought once in the UFC. Absolutely destroyed her. So I think that performance could actually get her in the UFC, because she is a 135er, which is a division they have. The other woman that really, really impressed me was Charmaine Tweet in the first ever women's lightweight 155-pound fight. A lot of people were picking Veronica Rothenhausler to beat her, but she absolutely dominated Veronica Rothenhausler, both surprising her on the feet and then finishing her on the ground with some brutal ground and pound that knocked her out, woke her up, and knocked her right back out again. So I think those three women really, really stood out, outside, of course, Michelle Waterson.
You talked about Charmaine Tweet defeating Veronica Rothenhausler. Obviously, you said that was the first 155-pound fight in Invicta. Let me ask you this. What does the future of the 145 and 155-pound divisions look like in women's MMA? And I say this for this reason. Veronica Rothenhausler, 5'11", 6 feet tall, something like that. Charmaine Tweet can't be much shorter than that. There's a lot of women out there, who play basketball, who play volleyball, who kind of like, certainly some women, but mostly men who, wrestle on an amateur level, wrestle in college. They reach a certain point in their careers where they can't go professional in their chosen sport, but they're still these elite athletes. Do you think that Invicta and other MMA organizations could start taking advantage of that whole group of women, your 5'11", 6 feet, 6'1", 5'10", larger athletes who played sports like basketball and volleyball, and who are looking for an outlet to maintain their athletic careers moving forward?
I don't know if themselves would shelter them. I believe they would let the amateur organizations take care of that, especially Tough Enough in Nevada. They do a lot of female fights, and you'll see a lot of the girls that pass through that organization come to Invicta. That's a good question, because Rothenhausler was a volleyball player, I believe, before she became an MMA fighter. It just depends. Some girls don't like getting hit in the face. Some girls don't mind it. So it just depends on the type of athlete it is.
I don't like getting hit in the face.
I don't mind it much, but it's not the most comfortable thing ever. But again,
it's firmly anti getting hit in the face.
Okay. Well, like I said, I don't mind it much, but obviously we're differing in that opinion there. But like I said, if they're not going to go straight to Invicta, they're going to start their career, do it the right way, and probably start off in the amateur circuit before they even catch the eye of Invicta.
What can Invicta do, and perhaps what can the UFC do to ensure that the stream quality is maintained throughout their events? Because obviously Fight Pass needs to have a quality stream along with it in order to have any product viability, because it's not like it's broadcast over the air. So what do you think the UFC and Invicta can or will do to boost their bandwidth, so to speak?
You know what? I heard the problem. I believe Robert Sargent from MMA Rising said that one of those capsules where they they broadcast from is only 4 hours. So that's why when you see the UFC Fight Pass stuff, they split the prelims and the main card. That's the reason they do that. They don't do that just to be annoying. So he speculated that it was probably because of that the stream died, which would make a lot of sense. So they need to either do it like the UFC Fight Pass stuff and split it from prelims and main card onto 2 different streams, or they have to put less fights on, which I don't think they're going to do, so it'll probably have to fall on the former.
This last question about women's MMA is perhaps a little bit premature, given that the UFC is just now introducing a second division in its ranks, but especially given their expanding partnership with Invicta FC, which women's division do you think will be the next one to debut in the UFC?
I really doubt there'll be another one. The reason why is Bellator just opened a 45-pound division, so all the best 45ers are going to want to go to Bellator now. Scott Coker talked about opening another women's division. I'm speculating that it's the 25-pound division, so I would assume a lot of the high-ranking 25ers would go to Bellator for decent payday. So I don't think they would ever start a 105 division just based off the fact that there's just purely not enough talent in 105.
Right.
So I honestly think they'll stop at 35 and 15. If it does actually come down to it, I think it'll be 25, but that would take away from the depth of 35 and 15. So I just think they should stop at 2, to be honest with you.
All right, Invicta 8, not a bad card overall. How long do you think it'll be before Invicta has another one?
I believe October was the goal. Like the end of October was Invicta 9, if I'm not mistaken. Shannon Knapp said she would announce something later this week or early next week, so we'll see.
I think, and I wrote a column about this a long, long time ago, but I think that women's MMA is the most popular women's sport, and that's pretty great because it's only been around for a couple of years.
I agree with you 150%. There's no other women's sport that gets this kind of attention. Women's basketball, never. I mean, maybe women's volleyball, but that's just for perverted reasons.
Yeah, I mean, our women's hockey team is fairly popular here in Madison, Wisconsin for UW, but they don't even draw like 20% of the crowd that the men's team does. So, yeah, I think it's pretty great that it proves that this sport is for absolutely everybody.
Absolutely.
And, I'm sure I'm biased in saying that, of course, hosting an MMA chat show, but, this sport is absolutely for anybody who's willing to put the work in, and I love that about it.
I agree with you.
Some people who will be putting the work in this Saturday, we will talk about next. Of course, I'm talking about UFC Fight Night, Bigfoot or Silva versus Arlovski. It's coming to us from Brasilia, Brazil, the capital of Brazil. That is on UFC Fight Pass. Main card at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. Prelims air at 5:45 in the East. Bigfoot is ranked 4th in the UFC heavyweight division, and that's kind of shocking to me. Arlovski 14th, and I think this kind of speaks to what you were saying before about the lack of depth, certainly lack of young talent among the heavy guys in the UFC. Bigfoot has not won in the UFC since 2013, and he's also got a positive. Meanwhile, Arlovski won a controversial and not that exciting decision against Brendan Schaub at UFC 174. So let me ask you this right off the bat. Riley, why is this the main event?
Well, because it's a Fight Pass card. I think the big thing they're banking on is that it's heavyweights, and the more casual fans more apt to watching heavyweight fights, and they're both in the top 15, so that's their logic there. Again, it's a Fight Pass card. You're not going to put your big draws on Fight Pass. You're going to put them on Fox Sports, and your pay-per-view. So, I mean, honestly, I like the fight. I like watching Andrei Arlovski fight, and I want to see how Bigfoot looks now that he's not on the PEDs, and he was doing TRT as well. So I'm actually yeah, exactly. So I'm just interested to see how the fight goes. I mean, the card as a whole isn't really gonna keep me home this weekend. I'll watch it on Sunday probably, but whatever. It's if you have nothing to do Saturday, it's something to watch.
Yeah. What are the chances that this one ends with a knockout?
I think it's fairly likely. Andrei Arlovski, kind of like Overeem, isn't really known for having a good chin, especially these days. He's got some mileage on him. But I mean, you remember Arlovski knocked out Roy Nelson a few years back before Nelson was even in the UFC, which is pretty impressive. So he's got the power. Yeah, exactly. He's got the power to knock out Silva as well. Silva's knockoutable. He's got a huge head, and you got a guy like Daniel Cormier, who I know is powerful, but Daniel Cormier knocked him out. So why can't Andrei Arlovski, who's got probably more technical and more precise striking, knock him out?
What happens to Arlovski if he wins on Saturday, and what happens if he loses?
A win for Arlovski would put him in the top 10, obviously, and it would probably give him a top 10 fight. I think that possibly a rematch with Roy Nelson if he gets past Mark Hunt, or if Mark Hunt wins, you could put him in there with Arlovski as well. I think that's a good fight to make, the winners of that. If he loses, I don't think they cut him. I think that Arlovski is you know, it's hard to think of it this way, but I think Arlovski is kind of important at this point in the heavyweight division, because I looked at it today and there's only like 30 guys in the heavyweight division. You can't just keep getting rid of them. So I think he'll stick around and he'll take a mid-card fight, maybe against a guy like Stefan Struve or Gabriel Gonzaga, and he'll stick around for a little bit.
If Bigfoot Silva wins, you know, it's hard to argue for another title shot for him since he's been shellacked by Cain Velasquez twice now.
Definitely.
So if he wins, he's probably just kind of staying where he's at, fighting another top 5 guy at some point. But if he loses, what are the chances that the UFC gets rid of him?
I don't think it's very likely. Like I said, with the amount of heavyweights that they have, it would just be foolish at this point to get rid of any heavyweight that's not like 0-2 or 0-3 as a whole in the company. Silva's still a marketable guy in Brazil. He's still undeniably a top 15 heavyweight in the world. So there's no way they'd get rid of him unless he maybe failed another drug test. But even that would be hard for me to believe that they would get rid of him anyways, especially since they're in Brazil and drug testing in Brazil hasn't really been the most attentive in the MMA world.
If I was taking a drug test for work, I would want it to be in Brazil. Not that I wouldn't pass. Final question about this main event: who's going to win?
I've gone back and forth. I think on UFC.com when I made my predictions, I said Arlovski, and then when I wrote a piece for Bleacher Report this week, I said Silva. Whoever lands the first big strike is going to win this fight. I'm going to go with Silva. I like the home court advantage. I like that he has the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt in his back pocket if he needs it, and he's definitely capable of taking Andrei Arlovski down if Brendan Schaub could do it. So if he does, it's going to be a long or a short night for Arlovski because Silva's got big ground and pound. And so I will take Silva in that fight.
I like Silva as well for this reason. I think that he can take more shots to the face than Arlovski can. And I think this one is probably going to be a firefight. And I'm not, we've seen Silva get knocked out, but I think that it will be easier for him to knock Arlovski out than vice versa. So I'm taking Silva. Co-main event of this UFC Fight Pass card is between Gleison Tibau and Peter Hallman. Hallman has a very impressive pre-UFC record, 13-1, and has looked pretty good in his 3 UFC fights. He's 2-1, and 2 post-fight bonuses for each of the wins that he's had, both of which came by submission. 14 of his 15 wins are by stoppage. Tibau, on the other hand, pretty much impossible to finish. He's been finished once since 2008, and that was a knockout loss to Michael Johnson. And he's fought, obviously, much higher quality competition, having been in the UFC since 2006. The thing about Gleison Tibau that stood out to me, Riley, is that, despite the fact that he's been fighting in the UFC for, 8+ years now, he's only 31 years old. So, he's got a lot of mileage, but he's still not what, people could consider an old fighter. With all that being said, it's a fairly decent matchup between a stout, very tough competitor in Gleison Tibau and a guy who's proven to be very dangerous in Peter Hallman. So who do you like in this one, Riley?
It's going to be an interesting one because last time we had a matchup like this for Peter Hallman, it was Francisco Trinaldo, and we all thought he was going to get run over, and he ended up tapping him out. So Hallman's a tricky character, man. He's got some very underrated striking ability. But these Polish guys, man, I'm telling you, they got really good grappling skills and really good submission skills. They can pull arm locks and leg locks out of nowhere. Yeah, it's unbelievable. I mean, you look at this. I've written a couple of pieces on it. The guys in Poland are legit, man. I'm waiting for them to sign some more because I think that they've signed some guys that I thought were lower on the scale than some of the Polish guys they've brought in so far. So, I mean, obviously you got KSW over there, which is snatching up most of the big talent. But, Peter Hallman, he's not a guy to sleep on. I wouldn't be surprised if he beats Gleison Tibau, but the thing about Tebow is he's a gamer and he is a grinder, and he just wears guys out. He's just so damn big at 155. You know, Hallman, he wants to keep this at a stick and move pace, because if Tebow gets in on him, he's going to put him against the cage and wear him out. So I think that Tebow's wrestling and his overall physical dominance is what's going to win him this fight here, and it's going to be a very, I want to put a prediction out here, a very lackluster, a very lackadaisical co-main event, and Tebow's going to take a decision.
I'm going to agree with your prediction there of Tebow by decision. I do have a follow-up question for you. As I mentioned, Tebow was named, but that was a knockout against Michael Johnson. Given the mileage that he has, does this concern you at all that a guy who was previously looked at as basically unknockoutable has suddenly been knocked out, or do you think it was just a coincidence and more credit to Michael Johnson's striking talent?
I think it's a credit to Michael Johnson. Anybody can get caught, you know. I mean, like we just said, Roy Nelson got caught by Andre Arlovski, you know, 5-6 years ago, whatever it was, you know. So anybody's able to get caught, but I think that's just a credit to Michael Johnson and how much he's come along as a fighter. And to be honest with you, I thought the stoppage was, if I remember the fight correctly, I may be thinking of something else, but I thought the stoppage may have been a little soon. I thought Tebow was still in the fight. I might be thinking about something else, though. But, you know, he's still tough as nails, and people don't usually get opportunities to hit him in the head because he's closing the distance so much and throwing guys against the cage and putting them on the ground. So maybe we just don't see it as much.
Yeah. Sure. The last thing I'll say about this fight is that Peter Hallman has one of the easier names to spell for a Polish man, because I'm from Green Bay, Wisconsin, and there are a lot of names that are like just C's and Z's and SKI's and just impossible to pronounce.
Yeah,
so,
I come from
I guess you come from
Polacks. I come from a long line of Polacks, and we have one of the easier names to spell, and some of the people we know don't have easy names.
Did it used to be spelled KONCZCZYCK?
There's a rumor that it used to be KONCZYK, but that's just a rumor at this point.
Sure, it wouldn't surprise me. And then an SKI at the end.
No, I don't know about that. But.
Yeah. Next on the card, this is the last one I want to talk about, Riley, unless you have others. I want to talk about Jessica Andrade, ranked 10th in the women's bantamweight division, taking on Larissa Pacheco in her UFC debut. This is a very exciting fight, in my opinion. Kind of one of the probably one of the most exciting fights on the card, if you ask me. Both of these ladies are very young. Yeah, Andrade is 22, Pacheco 20, but they have at least 10 pro fights apiece. So like they're sort of young, but yet very experienced in the professional women's MMA game. Andrade has had a very impressive showing thus far. Pretty impressive, at least 2-1 in the UFC with 2-1 in the UFC. She obviously lost to Liz Carmouche in her debut. Has taken a couple of decisions, including a split decision in her last fight since that time. Pacheco obviously debuting undefeated and has never been to decision in her 10 pro fights. She's got 4 by KO or TKO, 6 by submission. I think this one could be an absolute firefight. These ladies are obviously very evenly matched. They've got a fairly well-rounded skill set, as we can see by their records. Brian Henderson, editor-in-chief of Combat Press, linked to one of Pacheco's fights, previous fights from the Jungle Fight promotion, which was an absolute brawl that she looked very impressive in. So I highly recommend going to CombatPress.com, checking out the toe-to-toe preview piece for this event, and clicking on that link, checking out Larissa Pacheco's fight from Jungle Fight that Brian Henderson posts on there. I like Pacheco here by decision. This is a tough fight for me to call, but you know, she just looks tough as nails, and certainly nothing against Andrade. It's kind of a coin flip for me, so I'm taking Pacheco here, but I think it's going to be a bloody decision. Riley?
You know what? I think she's going to continue finishing here. Outside of a really, really nasty guillotine choke that Jessica Andrade has, I don't think she's got much to offer on the ground, especially against a girl who has really, really good submission skills in Pacheco. They're both really good on the feet, and when I say really good on the feet, I say that Pacheco is, while she can brawl, she's a little more technical, but I do think Andrade, you know, her success comes when she's getting into brawls and not technical matches, so she tries to lure people into that so she can throw those meat hooks, you know, because she doesn't have a lot of, she's like I think Joe Rogan said it best, she's like a little mini Vanderlei Silva when she's throwing those huge overhands and hooks. But Pacheco is clearly superior on the ground. And not only that, she's very comfortable off her back. She has a very, very tricky guard, very, very good triangle choke. She's capable of grabbing arm bars out of her full guard. So I like Pacheco, and I think if she doesn't tap her out on the ground, I think she's going to finish her with the ground and pounds. The referee's going to stop her.
Pacheco or Betcha Correia, who gets the title shot against Ronda Rousey first?
First or at all?
Well, at all, or take your pick.
Betcha Correia is not going to win her next fight. She's going to step up in competition, and she's going to get put down. If Pacheco is safely brought up, she's not thrown to the lions right away, because remember, she's only 20. She'll get a title shot in due time.
A little bit of crystal ball gazing there, but I thought I'd ask the question anyway. Speaking of women's MMA, we've got the Ultimate Fighter 20 coming to us beginning this week. Obviously, it's introducing the UFC women's strawweight division at 115 pounds. Riley, who are some early favorites in your mind to take this to take the first championship?
Well, obviously, Carla Esparza is one of them. I think wrestling in this competition is going to be huge because a lot of the girls in the house are kickboxers. So if you can get a really good wrestler in there, that they're going to have a very good chance of doing well. I think another one's JoJo Calderwood. You've seen her fight. Remember she beat new Invicta champion Katja Kankampa at her last professional fight in Invicta. I think her Muay Thai is possibly the best in the house, and she just has a nasty clinch and just devastating knees. So I think that's going to help. I think one other person who I think is flying under the radar, and it has to do with the RFA UFC connection, is Justine Kish. And actually, that's my prediction for the finale is Calderwood versus Kish. I think Kish is extremely underrated. A lot of people don't know her going into the house, but she's an RFA veteran that trains at Black House, and she's got world-class Muay Thai skills and a very, very underrated submission game on the ground. Actually, she has no knockout wins as a pro. She has 2 submission wins, though. I think that she's a person to watch on the show, and given the right matchup, she could run roughshod through the competition if given the opportunity. And I guess one other person I would name, too, just based off the amount of advertising she's getting in the commercials and stuff, Rose Namajunas is getting so much press that I'm starting to think that she might be in the finale just based off of advertisements. I don't know if it's because she's hot or because she's actually going to be in the finale, but just seeing her so much is starting to make me think, oh, maybe she's in the finale. So those are definitely a few people you need to watch out for.
The UFC has focused as much on the sort of potential for quote-unquote drama in the house as they have on the actual fights and the talent of the contestants themselves. Obviously, every season of The Ultimate Fighter pretty much has its own set of dramatics, whether between the coaches or between different fighters or what have you. I don't think that this season is going to be any different in that respect, but I do think that once I hope, and I'm perhaps being a little bit too optimistic here, but I'm hoping that the UFC chooses, like it typically does, to focus primarily on the fighting and combative aspects of things as opposed to on the dramatic part of the house. And I guess, they really have no choice because they're keeping the same kind of format that they have in the past. How do you think this one will do ratings-wise over the course of this?
I think that it will be the highest-rated Ultimate Fighter series, if not of all time, possibly in the last 10, 15 seasons. I know the early seasons were much more successful. Actually, I just thought of this right now. It'll be the most successful Ultimate Fighter series since the Ultimate Fighter 10 with Kimbo Slice. Yeah. There you go.
All right. I happen to agree. I think that at least the early episodes will get a lot of viewers. I think a lot of people are curious about women's MMA. I think just like MMA in general was when the first season of The Ultimate Fighter came out, I think women's MMA is still looked at as a bit of a spectacle. And I think that people are going to be curious. And if the UFC produces it correctly and paces it correctly and shows the right fights at the right time, and if these ladies really deliver, and I think they probably will because a belt is on the line, I think that this could very well sustain the good ratings that I think it will get initially in the series.
Well, let's just put it this way. I've seen the first episode. I had a sneak peek of it, and the first fight did not fail to deliver. It was a great fight.
Well, that is very promising indeed. I will be tuning in tomorrow night, 10 p.m. Eastern Time on Fox Sports 1 for the debut of The Ultimate Fighter 20. A champion will be crowned. The last bit of MMA news that I want to talk about is the stuff that happened at the Bellator event on Friday night. And unfortunately, Riley, I'm not talking about the fights themselves, which, overall, not bad. I'm talking about the thing that really everybody's talking about, and that's not really a good thing for Bellator. Midway through the card, they decided to bring Stephan Bonnar, who had a masked man sitting next to him the whole time, in the ring to talk about his upcoming fight with Tito Ortiz. Rather than just kind of give the standard, hey, I'm training hard and I'm going to give it my all, he decided to really, really impugn the character of Tito Ortiz. Tito, of course, started to do the same thing to Stephan Bonnar and his then unmasked accomplice, Justin McCulley. By the way, I was like, who is that?
I knew who it was, but that's just because I'm a freaking nerd.
Sure, and I follow MMA pretty closely, but I guess not closely enough to know who Justin McCulley is.
Don't blame you.
Yeah. So I guess my one question about this incident, Riley, is the following. Do you think that this incident detracts too much? Let me rephrase. Do you think it detracts from Bellator's product, or do you think it potentially enhances it by drawing in a certain type of viewer who will then see, for example, on this card that is going to feature Bonnar versus Ortiz, a lightweight fight between Michael Chandler and the Bellator lightweight champion whose name is unfortunately escaping me. Yeah, Will Brooks. Thank you very much, Riley.
No problem. I think in the short run it detracted from their product because they put it on right before a title fight, which that title fight was amazing. I watched Pat Curran and Patricio Freire fight out that entire fight. It was an awesome fight. Obviously, you know that Pitbull was the winner there. But I think in the short run, it definitely took away from the fight feel, the main event feel. But in the long run, let's be honest here. Spike TV has been in the pro wrestling business for God knows how long. They know pro wrestling, or they think they know pro wrestling. And I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to kind of make this MMA, this Bellator, now that they have a huge majority stake in the company, I think they're trying to make it a hybrid of MMA and pro wrestling, cutting promos, having these feuds that become personal. So I think that Spike had a hand in that. I think it is. I know Stephan Bonnar said it wasn't staged, but I'm sorry, that was just so. It seemed like poor acting to me. I thought it was definitely staged a little bit, but I think it's going to draw some attention. I mean, if you're a pro wrestling fan that's not really a huge MMA fan, you're like, oh, look at that. That's pro wrestling, except it's real fighting. So they might draw some people out of it, but in the same sense, you have your hardcore MMA fans, like a guy like you who was very put off by it. I was indifferent on it. I could care less what Bellator does as long as they put on fights. I don't care. But, I think Bellator is we'll see what happens, but I feel like they're slipping into a third position in the MMA world behind a ONE FC or either that or World Series of Fighting. But obviously they have a better television platform, so they might stay in the number 2 spot.
Yeah, I like pro wrestling and I like MMA, but I guess I want them to just stay separate. And I'm gonna write. I've got like a column, basically 3/4 written about this. That's gonna be on combatpress.com later this week. So check that out for like more detailed MMA/pro wrestling nerd who's 30 years old on that topic. But just overall, I don't know. I feel like if Bellator wants to remain a legitimate entity in the MMA world, that it has to refrain from having its fighters, when they're not competing with, basically like brawl in suits with each other in the cage. I feel like that makes the organization look kind of slapdash, and you'd never. Well, I don't want to say you'd never see that in the UFC, but because we saw something like that with Jones and Cormier, but that had a little bit more authenticity to it, or at least the feel of more authenticity than this sort of out of nowhere quote rivalry between Bonner and Ortiz. But I'm going to write more about this week. Check that out on combatpress.com. So that wraps up all of the MMA content for this week's midweek report. Follow combatpress.com at combatpress. Check out combatpress.com for all the latest MMA news, interviews, and opinions. But of course, before we close the show, Riley, as has become our now 2-week-in-a-row tradition, let's have a Rasslin Minute. I'm going to kick it to you, Riley, first.
All right, well, I'll start off by saying that Raw this week was about 9,000 times better than it was last week. First question is, when did they start doing seasons of the show? They kept talking about it being the season premiere.
Yeah,
if that's
right?
The case, right? And if that's the case, why would they make their season finale last week such a such a bad show? Because it was literally like one of the worst Raws I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
But this week was exponentially better. My high point of the night was the NXT match. I thought that they were only given maybe 5 to 8 to 10 minutes, and I thought that they completely stole the show in the middle of the broadcast. Tyson Kidd and Tyler Breeze weren't really given as much of a platform to perform, but they weren't there to do that. They were there to show off the Sami Zayn and Adrian Neville.
Yep.
Who, by the way, Adrian Neville, when he came in the ring, had no reaction, and after about 20 seconds of doing work, people were on their feet cheering for him.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think the guy has maybe a month to 4 months left in NXT, and they have to call him up. This guy is going to be the next great high flyer in the company. Yep. And I think this is a guy that could get over as a babyface without even having to speak.
And that would be a good thing because he's from Newcastle, England, and
yes.
Nobody from America can understand him.
He's a Jordan.
Riley, I guess we should have talked about this before the show. I was going to talk about Adrian Neville and how awesome he was. I'll add to this, though. You were absolutely right. The crowd went over huge for him, and I thought that this was a really good test for him specifically because, he did the cool front handspring stuff, and the face that one, there was a woman sitting ringside, and the face that she makes after he hits his corkscrew shooting star press red arrow is just priceless. So he's gonna. I think obviously the WWE needs is looking for somebody of the mold of Daniel Bryan, and I'm not just saying that Adrian Neville is that because he's small, but he's quick. He's very. One of the things I love about Daniel Bryan is like he sprints into everything that he does, and Adrian Neville certainly has displayed similar qualities in his matches as well. I'm not saying he's exactly the guy that Daniel Bryan is because Daniel Bryan is one of the best technical wrestlers in the world, and I think Kenta is going to do his part to sort of fill those shoes as well in NXT and probably fairly soon in WWE as well. But for a smaller type guy who's primary attribute is his speed and his ability to really give fans like big wow spots. I think that Adrian Neville is going to go over huge. I think the fact that the fans reacted to his stuff after they saw Chris Jericho jump off the top of the cage. He's 43 years old.
Right.
The fact that they reacted to Adrian Neville in the way they did after seeing that is very telling. And I think, Riley, you're absolutely right that he is going to be seeing the main roster sooner rather than later. And he did himself a ton of favors last night on Monday Night Raw.
Yeah, I think that if Seth Rollins hadn't turned heel and gone main event, I would have loved to see a tag team between him and Neville. That would be the most exciting tag team, I think, in the history of wrestling. They would have been so good together.
Can't disagree with you there. Well, that wraps up all of our topics here for this week's midweek report brought to you by CombatPress.com. Once again, check out CombatPress.com for all the latest MMA news, opinions, and interviews. I'm sure there's going to be a whole slew of interviews with fighters from this week's UFC card coming to us on CombatPress.com, as well as my column about the stuff that happened with Bellator, and perhaps something from Riley, maybe some updated rankings, but definitely check out CombatPress.com for all the latest in the world of MMA. Follow my main man Riley on Twitter. Big Riles MMA is his handle. Follow me on Twitter at Reinert Eric, and of course follow Combat Press at Combat Press. Riley, anything you want to say before we close things out?
Absolutely. We are still having the giveaway when we have 1 million followers on my Twitter account. We are 999,765 followers away from my Twitter giveaway, so follow me if you are watching this.
We are literally minutes away, potentially, from a big giveaway on the millionth follower for Riley's account. This close.
It's going to become my new Freebird. I'm mentioning it at the end of every telecast here. I am mentioning it every time. It's going to be my new Freebird.
Wonderful. Well, hey, everybody, thanks for watching. Again, go to combatpress.com every day for all the latest in the world of MMA. For Riley Contact, I'm Eric Reiner. Thanks for watching, and enjoy the fights this weekend.